Hello lovely people, and welcome to another episode of Queer History 101, rainbow coloured tales from our past that you probably didn't learn about in school. In today's episode, have you ever heard of same-sex adult adoption? Subscribe if you haven't already. Now this is a longer episode, but if short videos are more your thing, then check out my short series here on YouTube by clicking the card in the top left hand corner or follow me on TikTok at JessicaRushTheCloset. The link will be in the description. Now you've probably heard of adoption before, right? It's the creation by judicial order of a parent-child relationship, generally with the underlying desire to provide a child with a family structure and the basic necessities of life. And you're probably picturing a single adult or a couple and a small baby or child under the age of 18. But in some countries like the US, Canada, Japan, Germany and Spain, that's not the only type of adoption available. And the version that's between two adults actually has a very queer history. In both the adoption of a child and of an adult, the adoption bestows a significant inheritance, medical and countless other rights upon those involved. In a more emotional sense, adult adoption can also formalize the relationship with a foster or stepchild. This isn't just about money and benefits. But sometimes it really is. Beginning in the 1970s and before the legalization of same-sex marriage, adult adoption was used to legally define same-sex relationships for the protection that having your relationship recognized by the government bestows. After all, if you've been with your partner for 40 years and have shared your home together for 30 years, shouldn't you be allowed to live in it when they die? But what's this? Their blood relatives who threw them out as a teenager are suddenly back to claim half of everything, and you have no legal standing because they are the next of kin since, marriage was never even available to you two, so whoops, now you have to move out? How is that okay? It isn't. It is not okay. You know what you could do though? Just pull out the adoption certificate that shows your partner legally adopted you before they died, making you their next of kin. And now everything you shared rightfully belongs to you as their surviving partner. Trump card! Oh, that phrase is ruined. Adult adoption was relatively rare in the 19th century and actually is still not allowed in the UK today, as the person being adopted has to be under the age of 18 on the day of application as submitted. Which is bizarre when you think about it, as if you suddenly hit your 18th birthday and you just don't need anyone's help or guidance or have a desire for parental figures when you did the day before. You don't get an instant midnight download of the latest how to be an adult patch upgrade and wow, you can now get a proper job and cook complex food and work out how to pay taxes. I mean, can we please stop pretending like that's the case? It's really complex and scary. Science says your brain isn't even matured until 24, so why are we kicking kids out 6 years early? Speaking of kicking out children, adult adoption by same-sex partners has many pros, including legally reforming families around people who may have lost their own biological ones due to homophobia, and thus the creation of a family unit. Adult adoption was the only means to legally recognise family relationships in countries and states where same-sex marriage was illegal. The family unit also allows same-sex couples to have an easier time legally when dealing with any children, as the child will be related to both, as well as both being able to gain custody should one partner die. Although that child may have one of their parents listed on legal paperwork as their grandparent or aunt/uncle in this arrangement. Of course, adoption of a person involves the severing of the ties to their biological family, and while some saw this as a positive, it cannot be said that all did. Yet there were too many benefits to this marriage loophole to ignore. It was not until the 26th of June 2015 that the US Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage in all 50 states in Obergefell v. Hodges. Whilst it's true that marriage automatically conveys inheritance rights in many places, being someone's child does the same. Although one usurps the other, but we'll talk about that in a minute. If an unmarried individual dies without writing a will and has a child, in inverted commas, because sometimes these adoptions were the younger partner adopting the older partner, which I find intriguing, the adopted child will take all of the adopted property. Inheritance rights, once adult adoption takes place, are completely automatic and no other legal forms are needed. It's a great way for same-sex couples in the 70s, 80s and 90s to make sure that their partner would be taken care of upon their death, particularly when one had a disability or health condition or otherwise knew that they might die early. Remember as well that next of kin goes up as well as down. If you're unmarried and have no children, your next of kin is your legal parent. Same-sex marriage was passed into law in the UK the year I met my now wife, and I can't bear the thought that had it not been and were something to happen to one of us, the other would be left to quibble with lawyers about valuables and what belongs to whom and what happens to our house when we're partners for life, and should I die, everything is hers, and vice versa. Yes, I do know that wills exist, but don't tell me that a homophobic family has never come along and contested one. Moving on from death, adoption provides benefits for same-sex partners while they're still alive through said next of kin privileges. That designation allows a person to be legally recognised as the closest living relative of another, which in turn provides privileges in case of hospitalisation or imprisonment and conferred decision-making authority in case of emergency and incapacity. You can also get work benefits like, and this is a big one for Americans in the audience, health insurance. And you're probably wondering, but civil unions and domestic partnerships existed at the time. Why didn't they just go for those? Because interestingly enough, they were not as widely available or widely recognised as adult adoptions. Before the nationwide legalization of same-sex marriage in the United States, only 4 states allowed for civil unions between same-sex couples, and only 6 states and the District of Columbia allowed for domestic partnerships between same-sex couples. But most states recognize and have recognized adult adoption for decades. Just so bizarre. And let's be honest, civil unions and domestic partnerships were not, at that time, in any way equal to marriage in the benefits they could bring a couple. Domestic partnerships, for example, were municipality-based, but not recognised by the state, and the limited employment benefits it conveyed were at the complete discretion of the employer. So, none, if they wanted. Sure, cohabitation contracts existed, but those only covered your property, and it's only enforceable at the dissolution of your relationship. And you could go down other legal avenues too, like wills, insurance policies, trusts, healthcare proxies, partnerships agreements, and durable powers of attorney. And that's an awful lot of pieces of paper to make up for that one marriage certificate. Yet, the depths of legal rights that accompanied adoption pretty much covered it all. And again, protected against those homophobic blood relatives just swooping in at the last moment. Whilst reciprocal wills and trusts provided an avenue for same-sex couples to leave property to each other, the biggest threat to that was again the blood relative claiming undue influence, which is going to have that will tied up in court for a long time. And this was not uncommon. The stigma of homosexuality at the time meant that wills made by homosexual individuals were historically more likely to be successfully challenged than wills made by heterosexual individuals. Yay. So you see, there wasn't even a guarantee that your same-sex partner would ever receive the bequeathed property in your will. Unless, of course, you adopted your life partner right before you died, and now, they're your closest living relative, so no one else has any claims. I would say, try to ignore the fact that your romantic partner's now your relative. But A, I think you're more mature than that, and B, don't they become your family when you marry them anyway? Sounds great! What's the catch? Well, for one thing, not everyone else involved in adoption loves to see it used this way. Many argued that creating a legal parent-child relationship when there was clearly a sexual relationship was distorting adoption's purpose. But interestingly, courts didn't always agree, obviously, and noted that creating a parent-child dynamic had not always been the purpose of adult adoption anyway. In Re Adult Anonymous 2, the Supreme Court of New York reversed an order denying a same-sex couple's adult adoption, noting that the couple, who wished to avoid eviction, had a pure motivation for entering into the adoption, and this was not a manipulation of the adoption statute as they aimed to create a family, the very purpose of adoption. Although, here we come to negative number 2. What are the psychological ramifications of being legally your partner's child or parent? Isn't this just another way of being forced back into the closet? Even if the court upholds the motivation behind your adoption as being pure, how do your friends and family react? Probably not all with support. Same-sex adult adoption is a great sticking plaster over the gaping wound that is a lack of marriage equality. I said is, because sure, we have same-sex marriage now, but can we really say we have marriage equality if disabled people lose the benefits they rely on when they get married? Next downside, finality. Once the adoption had happened, that was it. There's a small window of time to show undue influence or fraud to the court, and if not, it's irrevocable. How can that be a bad thing, you ask? Okay, well, think about all the people you know who've gotten divorced. Now imagine divorce doesn't exist. Pretty sure that world's not looking great. Even if the romantic relationship soured and ended, the legal relationship of parent and child remained. Even if the adopter part of the couple, the parent, disinherits the adoptee, or child, by excluding the adoptee from his or her will, the adoptee will always have standing to contest the adopter's will, because the adoptee is forever a bona fide child of the adopter. Yeah! In effect, your ex can follow you around the globe forever. Fabulous. Also, if once same-sex marriage becomes a thing, the person who has adopted you dumps you and marries someone else, then bam! Their new spouse now gets everything. You're just an estranged child. Dun dun dun! This is seriously very soap opera right now. Furthermore, downside 4, not everyone actually has trouble with their blood relatives in this scenario. Sorry I made it seem that way earlier, but adoption does cut them off entirely for the adoptee in this situation. So adult adoption terminates the adoptee's natural right to inherit from his or her biological parents and places the adoptee into the adopter's bloodline. That person cannot then restore themselves back legally into their old family, which is especially problematic if, as we just mentioned, the relationship ends. And then finally, as mentioned, the US Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage in all 50 states. Yay! But what if you'd already adopted your life partner? Oops. Because there's no coming back from that. It's a catch-22 situation. People had used adult adoption as a way to emulate same-sex marriage, but now that it's here, they couldn't get unadopted in order to get married. After all, legally, an adopted father and son cannot marry, and neither can they divorce each other. Although many couples who previously went down the adoption route have then sought an adoption revocation in order to get married. It's just that they're tied up in court for years and years and years. But why? Because whilst there is considerable overlap between the benefits offered by adoption and marriage, there are some significant economic and legal benefits unique to marriage, and also, it's marriage! People would much rather write "my wife" on a form than "my daughter" when talking about the person they're in love with. Today, same-sex marriage is legal in only 32 different countries around the world. And while same-sex adult adoption was a workaround that happened in the United States, I'm sure there were others in different countries. What are some that you've heard about? Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you've really enjoyed it. Click the link in the description to watch more Queer History 101 videos, and I'll see you next time.